The reservation was for 7. By 8:45, Mara Tinsdale was still sitting alone at table 11, nursing her second glass of sparkling water, wondering what kind of woman she'd become. The kind who waited. The restaurant was Alden and Company. The sort of place where the menus had no prices, and the lighting made everyone look 10 years younger and 10 times wealthier. It occupied the entire 14th floor of a glittering tower in Chicago's Gold Coast. On a Thursday evening in mid-November, every table was full except the empty chair across from Mara. She'd worn the ivory blouse with the pearl buttons, her sister's suggestion, and pulled her dark hair into something that had taken 40 minutes to look effortless. She'd arrived at 6:53, early enough to feel prepared, late enough not to seem desperate. She'd smiled at the host, followed him through the warm amber glow of the dining room, settled into the chair with the window view exactly as the reservation specified. And then she'd waited. The date had been arranged by her colleague Dana, who described the man only as successful, well-connected, and surprisingly charming once you got past the first impression. Dana had been annoyingly vague about his name and profession, insisting she wanted Mara to meet him without preconceptions. Mara had agreed because it had been 14 months since her last real date, and she was tired of her own excuses. By 8, the waiter, a young man named Elliot with sympathetic eyes, had refilled her water 3 times and stopped asking if she'd like to order. By 8:30, 2 women at the neighboring table had stopped pretending not to look at her. By 8:45, Mara had mentally composed and discarded 17 different texts to Dana, each one more acidic than the last. She was reaching for her purse when the elevator doors at the far end of the room opened. She noticed the reaction before she noticed the man, the way the maitre d' straightened, the way a nearby server took a small, instinctive step back, the way the room's ambient murmur dipped slightly, as if the temperature had changed. Then she saw him. Tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested he hadn't gotten it purely from a gym. Dark hair, cut close at the sides, left slightly longer on top. A charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt open. Tattoos crept up the left side of his neck, dark, intricate ink that told a story even if you couldn't read it. Sharp jaw. His eyes were darker than she could tell from across the room. And his expression carried the particular blankness of a man who had never once in his life wondered what other people thought of him. 2 men flanked him, walking slightly behind and to either side. None of the 3 spoke as they crossed the room. He was coming toward table 11. Mara didn't move. She wasn't sure she remembered how. He stopped at the edge of the table, looked down at her, and something shifted in his expression, subtle enough that she might have imagined it. The 2 men behind him halted and turned outward, facing the room in a way that was quiet but unmistakable. "You're Mara," he said. "Not a question." "I am." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "And you're late." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat slowly, as if the word late meant something different in his vocabulary. Not an accusation. Not even really a statement. Just a sound she'd made. "I had something to handle." For nearly 2 hours. Yes. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them blinked. "I almost left." "But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" She'd asked herself the same question 7 or 8 times in the last hour. The honest answer was she didn't fully know, some stubborn thread of curiosity, some refusal to let the whole night go to waste. She wasn't going to give him that. "I ordered the bread," she said. "And I wanted to see how it ended." Something crossed his face then, not quite a smile, but the shape underneath one, something living one layer beneath the surface. He picked up the menu without looking at it and set it back down. "Dominic," he said. "Dominic Caruso." She knew the name. Not well, she wasn't the kind of person who followed that world, but she knew it the way most Chicagoans knew it, the way you knew about weather systems moving in off the lake. Something large, distant, and worth paying attention to. "Dana didn't mention your name," Mara said carefully. "Dana knows better." "That's a strange thing to say about a colleague of mine. Dana's been doing business with my family for 11 years. She's more careful about what she says than you might think." Mara turned that over. The bread arrived, a small, warm loaf with rosemary butter, and she was grateful for something to do with her hands. What kind of business? Real estate. Primarily. Development. Some logistics. He paused. Some other things. Some other things, she repeated. You're not afraid of me. He seemed genuinely curious about it. Should I be? Most people are. I'm not most people, Mara said. And I've already been sitting here for 2 hours, so my reserves for being intimidated are pretty depleted. He did smile, then, a real one, brief and unexpected, and it transformed his whole face for the 3 seconds it lasted. Then it was gone, and he was watching her again with that dark, steady attention she was beginning to suspect was simply how he looked at anything he found interesting. They ordered. She had the sea base. He ordered without glancing at the menu, reciting his preferences to Elliot without ever breaking eye contact with her. The 2 men who'd arrived with him had positioned themselves near the room's perimeter, and Mara noticed now that the other diners had stopped looking at their table, not because they'd lost interest, but because something about the shape of the evening had made it clear that looking was unwise. You work in urban planning, Dominic said. How do you know that? Dana told me. She told you about me. Not you about yourself. I prefer it that way. I like to know who I'm sitting across from. And what did you find out? That you have a master's degree from Northwestern. That you've been with the city's planning office for 6 years. That you were engaged once, 3 years ago, and it ended before it really began. That you have a cat named after a jazz musician. He paused. Miles. Mara set down her fork. That's a significant amount of research for a blind date, she said, proud of how even her voice came out. I don't do anything without research. You see that as unreasonable? I see it as responsible. I see it as invasive. You're still here, he said. I'm finishing my dinner. You're curious. She picked her fork back up. You're very sure of yourself. Yes, he said, with the flat simplicity of a man stating a fact about the weather. I am. The dinner continued. The wine arrived, a bottle she hadn't ordered, that Elliot set down without comment, and it was extraordinary, and she drank it anyway. They talked about the city, about a development project his company was weighing on the south waterfront, about the structural problems in the city's approach to zoning in historically industrial neighborhoods. She knew her subject and spoke without hedging, and she noticed he listened the way very few people did, completely, no visible impatience, no half attention spent composing his next line. It was past 10 when she reached for her bag. I should get home. He didn't move. There's something I need to tell you. Something in his voice had shifted, still quiet, still controlled, but with an undercurrent she hadn't heard before. I'm listening, Mara said, though she didn't put the bag down. The development project I mentioned, the waterfront parcels. The city's planning office has 3 contested variances tied to those parcels. The vote's in 6 weeks. I know you sit on the review board. The room went very quiet. What are you saying? She asked slowly. I'm saying I knew who you were before Dana said your name. I'm saying this dinner was originally arranged with a purpose. He held her gaze. I'm also saying that somewhere between the bread and the sea base, that stopped being the only reason I'm still sitting here. She stared at him. You brought me here to influence a planning decision. I arranged the dinner. I haven't asked you for anything. You were going to. Perhaps, he said. I'm telling you now that I'm not. Not tonight. Not like this. Not like this, Mara. But some other night, some other way. He was quiet for a moment. I want to see you again. Because of the variance vote. In spite of it, he said. Which is something I didn't anticipate. She stood. Her chair made a soft sound against the marble. The 2 men near the perimeter shifted, almost imperceptibly. Mr. Caruso, she said. I appreciate the honesty. I genuinely do. I suspect it doesn't come naturally to you. But I think you understand I can't see you again. Not while that vote is pending. Not after what you've just told me. And after the vote? She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. Good night. She crossed the dining room toward the elevator, the room staying very quiet around her. She pressed the button and waited, and did not look back. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. The doors began to close. Then a hand came between them. Dominic stepped in beside her. The doors closed. They were alone. I'm not asking you to change your vote, he said. I'm not asking you for anything professional. I'm asking for 5 minutes. You just had 2 hours. I spent most of it not saying the right things. He turned to face her. The elevator descended. I have not sat across from someone and forgotten what I was supposed to be doing since I was 22 years old. I'm 41. That should mean something. It means you're unpracticed at honesty, Mara said. That's not a recommendation. I know what I am, he said quietly. I know what this city thinks of my family. I know what the right thing is for you to do, which is to walk out of this building and not look back. Then why are you in this elevator? He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, Chicago fell away beneath them, 40 floors of light and distance. Because you're the first person in a very long time who wasn't afraid of me, he said. And I don't know what to do with that. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Mara stood still for 1 breath, 2, 3. Then she said, You have my number. I'm sure Dana gave it to you. She stepped out into the marble lobby. Don't call it until after the vote. She walked out into the November cold without looking back, the wind off the lake catching her coat as she kept walking, and she didn't let herself think about the expression on his face until she was 2 full blocks away. She thought about it constantly for the next 6 weeks. She voted on the variances with the same rigor she applied to every case, read every document, attended every public comment session, ran her own technical analysis without reference to anything else. 2 of the 3 variances were approved. The third was denied on structural grounds that had nothing to do with Dominic Caruso and everything to do with a drainage easement never properly addressed in the application. She didn't hear from him during that time. The morning after the vote was certified, her phone rang at 7:15. She was standing in her kitchen with Miles winding around her ankles and a cup of coffee going cold on the counter. She answered. The vote went the way it went, Dominic said, without preamble. I'm not calling about that. I know. Are you free Saturday? She looked out her kitchen window at the gray November sky, the rooftops of the neighborhood she'd lived in for 9 years, an ordinary Tuesday morning that suddenly felt like a threshold. I don't know what I'm doing, she said honestly. Neither do I. But I'd rather be uncertain about it in person. She laughed, a short, involuntary sound that surprised her, and Miles jumped onto the counter and knocked the cold coffee sideways, and she grabbed for it and missed, and she was still laughing when she said, Saturday, 2 o'clock, somewhere with prices on the menu. Done. She hung up and stood in her kitchen with coffee dripping off the counter, Miles regarding her with supreme indifference, and she thought about doors, the ones that locked, the ones that opened, and the ones you walked through with no idea what waited on the other side. Saturday came. And then the Saturday after that. And then a month of Saturdays, each one different, a museum, a long walk along the lakefront in the December wind, a small restaurant in Pilsen where the prices were very much on the menu and the food was extraordinary. He arrived on time to all of them. He didn't bring the 2 men who'd stood at the perimeter of Alden and Company. Or if he did, she never saw them. He talked to her differently than he talked to anyone else in his life. She understood this gradually, by contrast, by watching how he was in other contexts. She glimpsed it in the way a phone call would shift his whole demeanor, how he'd go shorter, more distant, how his sentences would close like shutters, and then he'd hang up and come back to whatever they'd been saying. And there was something in that transition, in the specific quality of his return, that told her she was seeing something most people never got to see. He told her things. Not everything. She understood there was a boundary she couldn't cross, a part of his life living in a different room with a different kind of lock. But he told her about his father, who'd built the Caruso operation in the 70s and died when Dominic was 19, with no transition plan and every expectation Dominic would just figure it out. He told her about his younger sister, Elena, who'd moved to Seattle to teach high school biology and called him every Sunday, the only person alive who could make him feel like he was still the boy he'd been before all of it. He told her about the city, not the city of parks and zoning codes, but the city as a web of relationships, obligations, debts, and promises. A living system with its own logic. She told him about the engagement, the man she'd almost married, the way she'd understood 6 weeks before the wedding that she was building something out of what she thought she should want, rather than what she actually did. She told him about her mother, who'd died when Mara was 27, and who she still, at 34, hadn't entirely figured out how to miss. She told him what she loved about her work, the idea that a city was something you could actually shape, that decisions made in conference rooms had physical consequences in the real world, and that she was, in some small and specific way, part of that. "You're the only person I know," he said once, on a lakefront walk in early January, "who talks about their job the way I've only ever heard people talk about a calling." "It is a calling," she said. "That's not embarrassing to admit." "I'm not saying it's embarrassing. I'm saying I don't know anyone like that." "Maybe you know the wrong people." "I know people who are very good at what they do," he said. "Disciplined, effective, ruthless when they need to be. I don't know many people who love what they do." "Do you? Love what you do?" He was quiet for a while. The lake was gunmetal and rough, and the wind meant business. "Parts of it," he said finally. "The problem solving. The ability to protect people I care about." He paused. "Not all of it." "What would you have done," she asked, "if your father hadn't died when you were 19? "Architecture." No hesitation. "I was going to study architecture. I was in my first semester. I'd been accepted to IIT." He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the lake. "Someone has to build things." She didn't say anything. She reached over and took his hand, and they walked in silence for a while, the city rising and glittering ahead of them, and she thought about what it meant to inherit a version of your life instead of choosing it. And she thought that in that, at least, they understood each other. The problem arrived in February, in the form of a man named Garrett Finch. Finch was a federal investigator, and he met Mara on a Tuesday morning in the lobby of her office building, before she'd even reached the security desk. He was polite, carefully dressed, and he had a photograph in an envelope, which he showed her without preamble, taken through what looked like a restaurant window, the two of them at a small table in Pilsen. "We've been monitoring Dominic Caruso for 18 months, Finch said. "We have reason to believe you may be able to help us." Mara looked at the photograph. She looked at Finch. Very calmly, she asked whether she needed a lawyer before this conversation went any further. "You're not being charged with anything," Finch said. "You're not a subject of our investigation." "Then I'd still like a lawyer." "That's not an accusation. That's prudence." She went upstairs and called her friend Priya, a public defender, who within 20 minutes had connected her with a colleague who handled exactly this kind of thing. By noon, Mara had been through a second conversation with Finch, this time with representation, and had confirmed exactly nothing except that she was aware of Dominic Caruso and had no information to offer. She called Dominic that evening. "I know," he said, before she'd even finished explaining. "Finch has been talking to people in my circle for a month. You didn't tell me. I was hoping it would resolve itself." "That's not Dominic, that's not how this works. That's not how things work with me." A long pause. "You're right," he said. "I should have told you." "What are they looking for?" "Things older than us. From before." "Are they going to find them?" Another silence. Heavier this time. "I have been very careful for a very long time," he said. But I was not always careful. And some things don't disappear no matter how careful you are afterward. Mara sat with that. I need to know, she said, whether being in your life puts me at risk. Not career risk. Personal risk. I need an honest answer. The honest answer, he said slowly, is that I don't know. I have never brought anyone into my personal life who wasn't already part of the other parts of my life. You're different. I don't have a road map. Then I need you to build one. She said it quickly. Dominic, I'm not running. I want you to understand this isn't over. But I need you to tell me the truth about what I'm walking into, because I will not be managed. Not by a federal investigator, and not by you. He was quiet for a long time. All right. They met the following Saturday, not a restaurant this time, not the lakefront, but his apartment. A spare, serious space on the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, almost no decoration except a set of architectural drawings pinned above his desk. Large-scale, detailed. A building design he'd done himself, he told her. Not everything she understood. Some things weren't his alone to tell. But enough. Enough for her to understand the shape of what his family had built, and what he'd spent the last 12 years quietly trying to transform from the inside, without losing the people who depended on it or the infrastructure that kept them safe. It was not a clean story. She hadn't expected it to be. When he finished, she sat quietly for a while. Miles was at home, 3 miles away, and the city outside the window was doing what the city always did, indifferent and infinite. I'm not going to help the investigation, she said finally. Not because of you, because I genuinely don't have anything to offer. But I also can't be a liability to you, Dominic. If my presence makes things harder for you. You make things clearer, he said. That's not harder. She looked at him. He was watching her with that same particular attention, the one she'd catalogued and analyzed and still hadn't entirely solved. I voted against one of your variance applications, she reminded him. I know. On the merits. I know, he said again. It was the right call. The drainage easement was legitimately unresolved. You had that reviewed? Of course I did. The ghost of the smile again. You were correct. She laughed despite herself. This is a deeply irrational thing I am doing. Probably, he agreed. You understand I will always vote on the merits. On everything. That doesn't change. I would not want it any other way, he said. And she believed him, which was perhaps the most irrational part of all of it. She reached across and took the architectural drawing down from above his desk, unhooking it carefully from the pin, and held it up in the light from the windows. It was beautiful. Thoughtful, ambitious, a tower that somehow seemed to be listening to the street beneath it, rather than ignoring it. What is this? She asked. Something I designed in college, he said. Before. It's extraordinary. He didn't answer. She held it a moment longer, then pinned it back exactly as she'd found it. Okay, she said. Okay. I'm not going anywhere. But we do this honestly. All of it. That's the only version of this I can be part of. He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought again of what he'd said in the elevator, the first person in a long time who wasn't afraid of me, and thought about all the rooms with all the locked doors, and what it cost a person to be the one who held all the keys. Honestly, he said. Yes. Outside, the city went on, enormous and complicated and full of people building things, buildings, lives, cases, futures, out of whatever materials they had available. And inside the apartment on the 32nd floor, two people who had each inherited versions of their lives that didn't quite fit sat across from each other in the November light, and decided, against most available evidence, to try.